What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Dorm Debate podcast. Right now, we are recording this Tuesday, January 3rd at about 7:25 p.m. And the reason I'm telling you that is because of the status of Damar Hamlin. If you do not know what happened, he is a Bills safety, and the Bills were playing the Bengals Monday night. And in the first quarter, T. Higgins caught a ball, ran and got tackled by Damar. Damar tackled him, fell down, and then Damar got up and he just kind of fainted back. And for most people watching, I think when John and I were watching, we thought it was a concussion. We've seen these with Tua, we've seen it with Russell Wilson, and plenty of other guys. Naheem Hines, who tried to get up and was a little wobbly. So our first thought was concussion. And they went to a commercial break, and John and I actually started throwing the football around, and we're just in our apartment waiting, and we look back at the TV, and they're still on the field. And Damar actually had to get administered CPR, and he stopped breathing. And from what the reports are, his heart stopped beating, and the CPR actually jolted his heart back. But the ambulance had to come on the field, and they were down for at least 10 minutes. And you could see the Bills players very shaken up for their teammate. And so he was taken off in the ambulance. Game was canceled. And John and I, we were staying up and waiting for an update. And the only update that they could really give is that he was in critical condition. But it was definitely like a scary time for players, fans, anybody watching, anyone who is a fan of the Bills and knows Damar. And I know a casual fan doesn't really know Damar Hamlin, but he's a safety. He went to Pittsburgh. It's his second year in the league. He was second team All ACC in his senior year and was voted team captain at Pittsburgh. So very influential person, and definitely someone in the Bills locker room that I think would be very vocal. And I think a lot of players, I guess, respect him, and he's a great player, a tremendously great player. But nevertheless, it was a scary time. And I know, Jonathan, you wanted to say a couple words before we kind of try to get into maybe some playoff talk, but all that kind of seems so meaningless at the time. But yeah, Jonathan, I want to take it over to you.
Yeah, thanks. So, yeah, it's a truly heartbreaking experience. I never imagined something like this could happen. I've never seen anything like this happen, and yeah, like I didn't know him too well, but I was hurt inside seeing something like that. But one thing I did like was the unity that came out of this, where the Bengals and Bills players both came together praying and both mourning over something like this. And not just those players, but the whole NFL, the whole sports world, and basically all Americans, everybody's praying for this guy and rooting for him. And that's one thing I like about that. We're all coming together to really show him and his family that we truly care about, the situation. And, I've said a lot of things about the Bills over the past few years, but, over the past several hours, I've sort of turned into a Bills fan, not because of football, but because of how they've handled the situation. I felt that was great leadership on Coach McDermott's part to go to Coach Taylor on the Bengals and say, hey, we probably shouldn't be playing right now, right? Even though it's a high-stake game, playoff implications, they both are able to come together and say, hey, we shouldn't play. And I had a lot of respect for that. And then, Hamlin, I think he has like a kid's charity thing, and it was like 2,500 they're trying to raise, but again, over 3 million donations. And I think Bills Mafia had a lot to do with that. And so I've just really respected, the Bills, as an organization, um, in the past several hours. Um, and yeah, I think Damar, he wore number 3, or he wears number 3 on the Bills, and and I think just to show, how remorseful I am, and given that there's 4 of us, um, I think it's best we honor Damar by having me set out of this podcast and just letting you 3 guys continue. So I'll see you guys next week.
There goes Jonathan. That was definitely something that he wanted to do. Uh, he texted me about and wanted to say a couple words. And so, um, yeah, it's tough. It's tough to talk sports when something so unthinkable happens. I mean, you watch a football game and think that it's entertainment and there's players that are living out their dreams and it's so fun to watch the highs and the lows. And of course, this is just one of those times where you're you're reminded of how dangerous this game is and how much these players put their bodies on the line. Caleb, I want you to kind of give your initial reactions to everything and how you're feeling.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I certainly appreciate what Jonathan said, and I certainly said my prayers, and I'm encouraged by the unity and everything that both sides, class acts on both sides of the organization of the Bills and Bengals, and certainly praying for a good recovery. Like you said, as of right now, as far as we know, he had a cardiac arrest, is in critical condition. He's not breathing on his own, has a breathing tube, and it is extremely troubling, to say little of words where words fail. It's troubling that they had to restart his heart. And my reaction to hearing and seeing that it's very little precedent in modern sports, period, of of stuff like that to that extent happening. I was reading Sports Illustrated had an article which we can share in the description, but they were just detailing how every year the first responders have to practice the ambulance route from each, I think there's 30 NFL stadiums, to the nearest hospital, and so hats off to the first responders and those emergency personnel and the procedures that seem to have we talked a lot about player health this year, with the concussions, like you said in the beginning, Jared, and I for what Dormer Debate is, not to make it about us, but we have brought it up time and time again that this is really, like John, you say it a lot like this way. It's young men, playing the game, and it's we might poke fun, and like Jonathan saying he was a Bills fan despite all the sports talk, but like we always we keep a good perspective, I think, to the humanity of the game, and that it, like you said, Jared, it is an entertainment thing, and has risks, but not at the expense at a human life, of course. So yeah, I was extremely troubled, and I'm this podcast usually comes out 2 days. We record it Tuesday night, comes out Thursday morning. So I'm certainly praying for the recovery, but being stable but critical. I hope he does well. I was initially really scared to hear about it because the only precedents I've heard about was what came to mind in the moment is a very scary collision in soccer where a goalkeeper got hit in the chest, just in a collision, and I believe passed away because there's certain things with the heart where if you hit it, it's extremely rare to my understanding, but it's an electrical rhythm, so sometimes it's very, very rare to get high impact collision at just the right spot at just the right time. And I'm thankful to God that Hamlin is not at that position. But when I heard about this happening, that's the only historical precedent so that shows how serious this still is. Yeah, I mean, I know thoughts and prayers is kind of the bumper sticker, what people say, but if you really mean it, then do it, and where words fail, like we could talk, I don't know if we could talk playoffs or not, but it hit close to home too, because he's 24 and went to Pitt. And for those of you who don't know, I'm from Pennsylvania, so he was the same graduating class in high school and college, 2016 to 2020. He was at UPitt, and it was just one of those things where we're same year, and not only that, but I can imagine I had buddies who went to UPitt, and like the number of times I visited Pittsburgh, and who knows where I'd cross paths or walked where he'd walked, and it's not to say they're NFL players, but just like it could have been me, it could be someone else. Like, how would I feel about being talked about in this situation? So, yeah, it's certainly tough, and it's a shame. It's a dangerous game, and I you hope these things don't happen, and you take steps to not. And some of the response on social media, not that this matters at all in the grand scheme of what's happening, but like in these moments, I saw people finding someone to dogpile. Like there's a bit of whether the NFL wanted the players to go back out there and play like some villain. I don't know if that's true. We don't know as of now, but that's not really the point. Skip Bayless got in trouble for a tweet, and whether it was sensitive or insensitive or not, like the point is, we're trying to find a villain sometimes, and I think rather we should look to the helpers, look to the leaders on the field that day. The Sports Illustrated article I mentioned a little earlier talked about the leadership, and Jonathan mentioned it too, of McDermott and Taylor and Burrow and Allen, like the head guys on the teams, maybe as far as we know for sure, taking the initiative to see the emotional impact on the field and the circumstances. And, regardless of what any other, media outlets or organizational executives are saying, to make the decision, like we just don't feel right playing, saying nothing of the safety of, if you're that emotionally shaken up, you don't want to be putting players out there hitting each other that distracted either, to, cause another injury. So, and I played football growing up for many years, and I played in high school a year. And I don't know if I shared this on the podcast, but one of the things that stopped, and I loved it, and I still love the game, but I stopped playing because I knew I probably wasn't going to go to college for it. And that was around the time concussions were becoming more inspected and aware of. And I just felt like my brain was going to help me more in life than my football skills. But I certainly miss the game, miss the camaraderie, but it's like, we know it's a dangerous game. So we got to, I was just thinking too, how over the years we talked about, I think the league is doing, in some things, the league is promoting safety in a better way. You look at some of the highlights from the early 2000s of hits, and now players just know not to hit that way, because at the end of the day, it is a game, and it is competition, it's physical, but you don't have to, we learn more and more. So I think taking the right steps, but yeah, certainly a player's health and life, obviously, is precedent over anything. I don't know any other thoughts you guys have about it, because words generally fail,
John?
Yeah, I echo the same things you guys said so far, but it basically just puts everything in perspective. Caleb, like you were saying, like at the end of the day, this is a sport that we all love, and we love the competition of it. But at the end of the day, it's all about, if we're not healthy and we're not safe, then we can't compete. We can't do anything. So I always go on my TikTok lives on Sunday, and I say to everybody, like, yeah, fantasy football is fun. It's not always about winning though. Like, as long as you have fun, like the most important thing is having fun. And if you're not healthy, you can't have fun. So at the end of the day, we have to remember that we're all human beings. So like, we're playing a pretty dangerous sport. Like, I remember Travis Kelce, somebody asking him a few weeks ago how he felt after a game. And he's like, it's like I'm in a car accident, like every play. And it's like, that's serious. Like, it's these grown men. You don't realize how big they are until you're like down on the field with them. But they're like freaks of nature, and they're both running full force at each other. And it's nothing to, it's kind of crazy how this sport is played. But it just puts everything in perspective that, you can't take anything for granted. And we are all just watching this dangerous game, but we all, enjoy the competition. But at the end of the day, it's all about health and safety.
Yeah. I think I think the Kelsey testament was good. Like literally, I'm sure this is the YouTube algorithm recommending this because of everything with Hamlin going on in the Bills, but like it puts it in a different perspective. This piece of news about, if you guys remember, JJ Watt was talking about that he had to get his heart restarted. It wasn't on the
Oh my
field, but it
gosh,
was like,
right.
that was just showed up on one of my feeds, like just on YouTube, and I was like, I could see how the algorithm's doing it, but just like in perspective of what happened, like that's certainly something. And that I think the title of that, whatever, however it showed up, was like he had his heart restarted and then he went back to play the same week, question mark. And there's a certain element of toughness that I think in proportion is good. You compare it to maybe soccer or maybe basketball sometimes, where people flop and they're a little soft and faking injuries. But then there's the other extreme where maybe we should have been more ears on with what Walt was saying before. And I think we've touched on it inadvertently with the injuries to Tua. We talk about, all the football stuff going on, but like we know he's had concussions. And is that affecting his play? But not only affecting his play, but what about his life? Future down the line, we talk about, I think in the history of NFL, there was, I think, only one NFL death on the field. But that says nothing of the players who dealt with CTE and committed suicide off it. So I think, or dealt with health issues because of it. So I I think as the league matures, I think, and as a fan base becomes more aware, we got to kind of demand these changes to happen because it's a business in sometimes the worst way or the best way. So we talked about, um, some teams doing running backs by committee. Maybe that's also an adaptation to, maybe it's a strategy thing, but it keeps less, like you're saying, John, these huge guys just hitting each other all the time. Maybe you're not going to see that as much because of just the health issues. Same with contracts thing. I think with the, people getting more money in college, maybe they can start to, I don't know. I think I mentioned this in another podcast, but what about players taking if you're in a high impact position, if it's more normal to take a year off or, take if this team's expanded, it's kind of spitballing, but these are just things that we are not, we are, it's almost curious that we're just talking about it this way, you know? Um, and maybe this should have been done sooner. And we're not execs. We're not part of any media empire. It's just us. We just love the game of football and talking about it. But like we're kind of alluding to, like if I was in that shoe, you know, when I was playing, I know it was dangerous. When I was in high school, I remember a guy like had to get the ambulance on the field, and they had to saw open the helmet for a concussion issue. So there is that risk to it, and but like you guys said, never at the expense of human life, never because it's just entertainment. Um, so I hope that, and those are just spitballing things, but I was just like, you hope that if you get to that level, there's certain cushion that players don't have to put their whole bodies the way Watt does or Kelsey does for 10 years in their 20s and 30s to maybe have a whole lifetime of income. Like maybe there's a way that they can, I don't know, the standard can be different where, it's almost like winning the lottery, where a lot of lottery winners, spend all, they make a lot of money in a short period of time. And it's sometimes you hear about that with sports players too. So maybe if you restructure it financially to pay over time or things like that to, who knows? But yeah, it's certainly keeping them in prayer, and anyone from Dorm Debate who's a praying person to certainly do that because I believe it goes a long way. So yeah, and that's the latest we have. I mean, not that it doesn't matter at all. I think it was wise to postpone the game, but I wouldn't be shocked if they cancel it and just figure it out. Like we might not have all the answers, but like they
Yeah,
have right. Like, what do you do?
I mean, I think. Oh, so I don't know if I said the current state, but he went to the hospital and was, from what his marketing rep says, which is the only person that's actually been close to Damar at this time, has said that he actually was awake, but then they had to sedate him and put a breathing tube down his throat. So that's what we know currently. But it's still critical condition, so it's not like it's in the clear, and so that's why it's just an odd time right now because he got injured, about, I don't know, near 24 hours from right now, and John and I, we stayed up till, I don't know, 11:30, 11:45, thinking like there's got to be an update like soon. Like what's
That's
going
3 hours after the first quarter because it was 5 minutes left in the first quarter, right? So you guys, just for context for
Yeah,
people listening, that's 3 hours of, the ESPN, hosting it, trying to
yeah,
figure
and
out as
they're
well.
and and everyone that they threw to, like all the reporters, just like there's not much. There's no answers I got for you, no new news, and that's when John and I were concerned because usually if a guy has a concussion or if it's a torn ACL, like there's just stuff that people announce right away, like, oh, he's not coming back, like he's injured or he's got a concussion, he's in concussion protocol, he's going to the hospital, but he's awake. Like there's always something. There was nothing after this. I mean, and that's the scary part. And I want to talk about the other side of this, which I didn't even. It's crazy that people are doing this, but the other side of this play is T. Higgins, Cincinnati Bengals wide receiver. He's the one who collided with um, with Damar, and everyone is throwing hate at him, which is just insane. I mean, people are commenting on his Instagram like death threats and saying you caused this, you're a terrible person, and that's just awful. That T. Higgins is not looking to take someone's life on the field. That's just ridiculous. And
Yeah, it's
for anyone to even think that and comment that on his page, like he is feeling, I guarantee you he's feeling one of the worst feelings of all time because he's the one who collided with him. He feels probably a lot of guilt. And for people to comment and say that you caused this person to die or you caused this person to be in this position is ridiculous. And
it's
T.
dumb,
Higgins
yeah.
is doing the same thing that Damar was doing. They're just playing a sport
Yeah.
and they're trying to win, and that was it. There's no ill will towards any of them. And if anything, the NFL is more of a brotherhood than I think ever. And across many sports, NBA, you see teams teaming up and doing a super team, and there's not as much animosity and hate in the NFL, and the MLB, NBA as like the 80s and 70s. People are more of a brotherhood and they're sticking together because of certain things that have happened, whether it be politically or with injuries and player safety. You see more of a connection between players of different teams and
Different backgrounds, all that stuff.
T. Higgins, I forget when he played, but he played in the ACC. He played at Clemson. So he very well could have played against Damar at Pitt. Could have been, had some relation to him. Like it's just crazy to think that people are blaming T. Higgins for this. It is a very fluke thing that is so unfortunate. And Caleb, you mentioned a little bit about what happened. I kind of saw a doctor claim what happened, and I guess your heart beats in certain rhythms, and there's a window in that rhythm where if you get a hit to the chest, that it can cause like a cardiac arrest, and they're saying that's most likely what happened, and they're saying it is 1 in a million chances. I mean, think of how many football games have happened. People getting hit in the chest. You don't see this. And it's just something that is super, super uncommon and like a lightning strike, unfortunate. But
And then you add the way he fell. I mean, I'm glad they weren't replaying it the way other hits are, but not just for context. Like, it's very possible, as far as we know, not to interrupt you, Jared, sorry. But I'm not a doctor. I haven't seen that video in particular from that doctor that but I that's just my understanding of that condition potentially. But seeing the context of the injury, like you take into consideration too, if it is cardiac arrest, that's like you falling to the ground causing a concussion was very possible too in this scenario. So then you're dealing with whatever, happens to the brain when your heart's not beating, right? It's just a very scary thing. So, yeah, you were saying, Jared?
No, I mean, I was just going to go on and say
But
that.
yeah, and it's an impact game, and like you said, it's like a play T Higgins has done thousands of times, a tackle Hamlin's done thousands of times, and yeah, and if anyone in our audience is commenting that crap under Higgins, like don't consider yourself a dorm debate, certainly not.
Mhm.
I think it goes to a little bit of, I don't know, people trying to find a villain, or trying to find and I think what you have to do is just look at the facts, and that's kind of why I I'm kind of talking circumspect around what we know and don't know, because it is 24 hours after the fact, and I see tweets of people who are, like, not to say there is or isn't misinformation, but always like, how close to a real source of the truth are we, and yeah, and it's encouraging to hear as far the latest information that he's stable but critical. That's
Mhm.
better than unstable. But yeah, we gotta get him breathing on his own. Got to get his, get him back to shape. Because certainly not breathing, all that stuff. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's just people on the internet. If you stand for anything on the internet, I think you're gonna get death threats, and it's like this class list from people, or just trolls, or someone who doesn't know any better, or knows better and this doesn't, for the sake of chaos. So it's encouraging at least to see the as I think it was Mr. Rogers said, like, you look at the helpers, like the first, personnel, first aid from each team, the leaders on the field, or organizationally, uh, the things that did work well that night and continue to work well at the University of Cincinnati, I think it was Medical Center. Um, Everything that works, look at that for encouragement. I think every NFL team's Twitter, which is a very small thing, but it was just a sign of, like you guys were saying, like it's a brotherhood. It's at the end of the day, we poke and play, but it's, this is a dangerous game. It's for entertainment, but it's a game. But every team changed their logo to the number 3 for Hamlin, so as a sign of solidarity, and it's encouraging to see people wanting to help, wanting to donate. Um, so I'd rather be reminded of that, and also kind of uh, remind anyone in our audience to not tolerate such indecent behavior, in yourself or in people around you, if they're doing that to anyone, certainly. So look to the helpers, look to be the help too.
Mm-hmm. I mean, what's crazy about this play is it wasn't a hit to the head, it wasn't
Yeah.
like a concussion. And so that's what's odd about this is the league college NFL has been so adamant about, controlling concussions or preventing concussions and focusing on the helmet. And then all of a sudden you have this happen where he gets hit in the chest. And so now
then it brings up the question about the padding on the chest and if it's
yeah,
distributing the force.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know. I mean, I know that in the 90s and stuff, those pads were huge, like the shoulder pads, and I don't know how far down they really go. I never played
It's interesting.
football, but now you have to think, okay, now do we have to make the shoulder pads go a little lower and have like some sort of plate or something to protect hits to the chest?
At least maybe the left side.
Yeah, or the left side, yeah.
And it's such a rare, if that is what he has, because again, we only know what we know.
It's very few information, but
anything you hear from any, even verified Twitter or verified, it's like always like, where did they get that information? Where did, but you're right. I remember playing, just to add context, maybe the league's changed in what they allow, but I remember I was an offensive and defensive lineman. I was also kicker one year, but like those pads were different than the wide receiver pads because you needed the range of motion to catch the ball, versus offensive lineman, your hands aren't getting that high up, but that was just at a high school level. So with how, it's an interesting thought. I think I don't know if I mentioned, nor does it really matter if I did, but I remember thinking at least how when players get ACL injuries and they come back and we talk about how they look different, I've thought it was weird how it's not more commonplace to like wear a protective brace or like armor that area if you have a history of injury and if you're a quarterback. Like that's just not something we think about in the NFL. and maybe we should, and make it more normal. I know we talked about, like, we've seen players with certain the collar accessories or other stuff, and we talked about the concussions being a very serious, and they're trying to fix it, or not fix it, but do their best they can with what they have, and what they have by getting the mushroom caps in the off season, to get information. But I don't know. I think they have to move faster. I've talked to you guys about slit film, and how that there's a whole movement of players who were against the turf that was that was uncomfortable to play on at minimum, and the players felt unsafe playing on, and the data was murky at best in regards. So, like, that's just the fact that players had to go out of their way and make an organized effort is almost it's not a statement on what the NFL is or isn't doing, but it just says something about how quickly concerns are heard if they have to do that. And these guys are players and millionaires, and they have followers, and they're fans, and they represent the teams. We're just fans. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's something you there's some things that there's some events too that you can't control what happens, and these events too show you how little control we have in life. So that's why I think it's certainly wrong to I'm certain Higgins feels guilty, but seeing that tackle too, it wasn't like a dirty hit or a dirty tackle. It was just even if by any means it was almost technically fine. It was just very rare event, and you can't really protect for a rare event. So I think it's just doing the best you can with what you have to make things better.
Yeah, I mean, it's strange when the hit. It seems like the hardest hits people, get right up like super fast, and then like some hits like Damar's or like Tua, we saw he kind of just got like thrown to the ground awkwardly, and that triggers it, So it, like you said, it's just such a freak thing that how you can never be 100% protected of it,
right? Without people going in armor, So there's an element of risk, but
right, but
we don't. Yeah,
I mean, right now,
clueless either,
Yeah, I mean, right now, I think the best people to talk about this is the players. I mean, go up to the players that are playing every single week and say, what are your concerns? What's this? What's that? How are the helmets? How are the pad? Like, where are their concerns at? And then that's where I think the NFL can start to fix this. But something that happened to Damar, I don't know if this is something you can prevent, which is the hardest part. And I think that's why we hold these players such high respect, because they're putting their life on the line. Like, legit, there are a lot of consequences that come from throwing your whole body at another 6'6", body. That's just what happens. But it's I know John and I talked about, in 20 years, 50 years, will there even be football because of how dangerous it's becoming? And I mean, I can't remember a time when concussions were so common now. Like, I don't know, when John and I, we can talk about this a little bit. When we saw him fall down, I was so desensitized to concussions that I immediately was like, oh, he got a concussion, and then just kind of like went off and started throwing the football around.
Right.
Like, it's just like, oh, you see he's got a concussion. Oh, okay, concussion.
But that's real. Like, that's real talk about how right.
It's, and like, John, I know you talk about this. Like, we saw, I think we were together and we saw Naheem Hines. And he like got up and was just like wobbly. Like, I've never seen such bad reactions from concussions like this. And I've been telling John, and maybe you, Caleb, we can kind of like research this, but like, is there something with the helmets? Like, did they change helmets? Did they change brands? Like, I just cannot fathom that concussions are so common now.
I don't know. I just, you reminded me too of, and maybe it shows how many of these that I just had in the bank in my mind, and I was just like, yeah, that's just, I just know that. Remember when Aguilar had to like almost draw a penalty on himself on the Patriots, I think, because of his teammate who was clearly concussed. I forget who the player was.
Devontae Parker.
Yeah, and and the fact that a player playing the game saw his teammate hurt and had to like, you see the video, he's waving his arms, trying. I
Mm-hmm.
don't. And interesting because I think if he were to call a timeout and he was wrong, like the systems in place in regard to the rules made it so he just had to wave his arms, like he couldn't, or he'd draw a foul. Like there wasn't a pro player, pro game decision other than waving your arms, which is crazy that
Mhm.
it wasn't flagged earlier. And that's just something that we saw and we were, and like people gave props to Aguilar, and as rightly should, for being the good teammate to do that, you know. But it makes you now think too, well, like how many millions does the NFL make? How many, you know, why is this still being given to the players? And like you said, Jared, I like what you were saying, that ultimately, you know, when the I just bring I talk about slit film because it's something I've been researching, but like you get data points saying like, oh, well, some people say it's good, some people say it's bad. You get executives who kind of look at the numbers and think, oh, it's probably safe. But then all you have to do is talk to the people who actually play, who put their bodies on the line. And if they're almost unanimously saying, yeah, it's worse to play on this kind of turf or turf in general, just listen to them. If you wait for the numbers to prove, it's too late. So I think with the concussion things, um, I don't know if it's gotten worse or we're just more aware of it, so the numbers are better at reporting, and
Yeah, I was
it's a
also thinking
statistical thing,
like the concussions this year have been so bad that maybe we're just looking out for them a lot.
and which is
But
a good thing because,
yeah,
yeah, I think, and this makes you think too of, and I mean, I'm not like people come to Dorm Debate for the answers, like what are we thinking, but we have a platform, and you know, and how to make the game safer. We've mentioned like the kickoffs are some of the most dangerous plays because it's like the full sprint at the thing and punishment. And so maybe you just change the rules of the game so you just start at the 30, or you know, things like that. Like it,
they've
it
been doing that.
changes
I think in
changes the game a
NFL,
lot.
or I don't think
It's-
it's in the NFL, but I think college.
yeah,
If you fair catch a kick inside like the 15, then you get it at the 25. But if you do a touchback, it's at the 20. So players are more inclined to, even if it doesn't reach the end zone, they're more inclined to fair
yeah,
catch it and get at the 25. So they're like having a little bit of an incentive to fair catch it and avoid
exactly.
collisions rather than to run it out. But and I know it's hard because then you're taking away an important part of the game. I mean, a guy like Devin Hester or
Yeah, I
uh,
remember.
Turpin on the
Yeah,
Cowboys. I mean, that's one of the main reasons he's on the Cowboys. He's a returner,
Mm-hmm.
and if you take that out of the game, now a guy's out of a job, and he can't differentiate himself on the field. So it's so difficult to make these changes, but also be mindful that this game has its fundamental rules that
yeah,
are important to the game, but also important to the players, like Turpin, like Devin Hester, who have an opportunity to return punts or return kicks. And if you take that away, now what are they left with? You're left with an empty roster spot, and now one guy or two guys don't have a job. So it's always a fine line to be aware of safety, but also be aware of the rules of the game. So
yeah.
um,
And my,
yeah.
my thinking, I'm not an NFL exec or anything, but yeah, I think back to even like, I mean, just going off here, like Vince Papale, you know, the movie Invincible with Mark Wahlberg, like that
Mm-hmm.
special team and special teams, we've seen it define games, and that's a part of the history of the game, part of the what makes. And I've played on special teams, like it's fun, yeah, sometimes, but there are going to be trade offs to any solution. And I think, like you said, we can be creative in making structures that give players an incentive to be safer, you know,
Mm-hmm.
without, because I think some people in an emotional response will say anything that's any risk we shouldn't partake in. And I don't think that's a good way to live. I mean, John and I, we played intramural soccer together, and I played soccer, many years. But one thing that I did, but I never focused on was heading the ball too much because of what I knew statistically about concussions in soccer because of heading the ball. So it's like that's just something I did, but that's a little thing in how we changed the style a bit of how to play these games. So it's like we can use what we know scientifically to create strategies and still make it entertaining and safe. but and having that right balance. I just think right now it's too much on the money, too much on what you can fully prove. And I think that's sometimes you have to just kind of think out of the box. Like I've enjoyed seeing this season, seeing punters do great job. And I think that's like, maybe you make it so it's like, if it hits in the 5, like it has to be a fair catch and it's up to the punter to deliver a great ball. Or if it bounces off someone, like you can make up rules. This is a made up game. We can make up the rules. Like if it's a short punt and it doesn't get past the 20, then you can return it, or you can, like you can make up these things. Or if it's a great punt and it lands within the 5, you got to see where it bounces or whenever it is, or wherever the special teams makes a play. You could incentivize that, So there's going to be trade-offs to everything. And I just think, like, again, I think it was right to postpone the game, and certainly such a injury is so rare. And I don't see any scenario where such an injury happens and you just keep playing. It's like you said, we've gotten so desensitized that maybe that's a mistake on our part of as fans, of like not creating a market that punishes, advertisers for not really caring about these things. Either, it's not just, the NFL is also in a punching bag too. It's like, there's not always a cause, but let's just reassess about what works and what doesn't, and try to get to what's true and what we can fix, and what trade-offs are worth it, and what, we still some risk, but let's be smart, be the smartest we can and have fun. Like you said, at the end of the day, it's fun, and these are people's lives. So it's, we're not in Rome anymore in the gladiatorial games. Let's put the people first, put the humanity first. And and it's something too that it's a shame, because I wasn't really aware with his game before Damar Hamlin, but it's just like the testament to him personally, but so many players across the league that use their platform to be involved in the community and to give back. Like, they don't have to do that, and that it feels so common. We should appreciate it, and champion that over the making it common about injuries and things like that. What can we do to make this better? So, and I don't know, but these are conversations that I hope, moves the people who make these decisions to have them and do these things. Cause I'm not, what are we? We just use our position to talk, but that's a powerful thing. So I don't know what else you guys are thinking.
Yeah, I just want to say, I told everyone in the beginning that, Damar Hamlin was a captain his senior year at Pitt. And captains, I know at least at Michigan, and I know many other places, it's a player voted award, or whatever you would call it. So that just kind of shows you what type of person he is. There's only about 4 to 5 captains on a team that has nearly 60 players.
Yeah.
So for him as a safety to be awarded captain his senior year shows his leadership and what kind of characteristics he has as a person. And that's what hurts, is you see a guy like that who is living out his dream. We're seeing it play out in the NFL in his second year. He's starting for a team that's fighting for first place. And, that happens, and it's gutting. It really is. Does anybody else want to say anything else before we kind of wrap this up? I know we had plans to talk about the playoffs, but as I started talking about it, it just doesn't feel right. I know Joe Buck or Scott Van Pelt was saying, like, everyone was looking forward to this game between 2 teams fighting for number 1 spot, playoffs, and then in an instant, 1 second, it is just completely meaningless in 1 second. And so you think, there's playoffs on the line, first place, and then this happens, and you're like, dude, I could care less. So that's kind of how I'm feeling as I start to, as we start this podcast, start talking. But I don't know if you guys want to say anything before we hop off.
Yeah, no, the last thing I would say is that hopefully by the time this podcast posts, and hopefully before the games start this upcoming Sunday, hopefully we get word that he's fine. So that's just the main thing, is making sure that he's all right.
Yeah, 100%. This is exactly that.
And I'll as we were mentioning about Damar's toy drive or fundraiser, so we'll put a link to that in the description. And I mean, it's crazy. So he put a goal of 2,500, and John, I think it's at like 5 million, right? Last time we
it's
checked.
just over 5 million as of
That's
7 o'clock on Tuesday.
wow.
I mean, that is mental.
Yeah, because I had heard 1 million was my most recent. Because I was reading more other information about like the injury. Then Jonathan, I think, mentioned 3, and now it's at 5. I mean, it just shows how many people want to help or at least do something positive. So yeah, if there's any words, it's first and foremost, prayers for the healing, and hopefully when this comes out that he's better, doing well. We certainly pray for that. But yeah, instead of looking for a villain, it's a small thing, but thank you for mentioning the toy draft to anyone who feels compelled to do so, but trying to do good and to remember that this is a game. And imagine if you were in his shoes and how you'd want to be spoken about is something I kind of reflected on. If it was me, if it was someone I knew, and how we speak about these to our friends and to amongst our circles, but also to remember to like, this is a game and what matters and what truly matters. And we just passed the holiday season and all that, and it's a shame that, and it doesn't have to be this way to remember like what really is important in life. So we'll certainly be praying for the healing of Damar Hamlin.
Yeah, everybody's thinking Damar right now, and I think as I'm wrapping this up, I think I'm gonna probably post this tomorrow and just get it up as soon as possible, just so this isn't old news, and hopefully by that time we have some more good news about Damar. And yeah, thank you guys so much for listening. As I said, the link for Damar's toy fundraiser will be in the description. And yeah, just be mindful of what you guys say on social media about this whole situation with Damar and T. Higgins. And we talked about T. Higgins. Nobody wanted this to happen, and it was never intentional. So for people blaming T. Higgins, it wasn't T. Higgins' fault. And Damar made a great play, and it's unfortunate that this whole thing happened. But we're hoping for a speedy recovery and hopefully some great news, and so that we could get back to the podcast next week and talk playoffs. I know that it's going to be an exciting time, and we're super excited to talk with the bracket coming up. But first and foremost, making sure Damar Hamlin is okay is the number one priority right now. And once we figure that out, then we can start talking about other things. And I think that's what the NFL is talking about with the Bills and Bengals game, and games coming up this week. So no games Thursday. There's games Saturday and there's games Sunday. Who knows if they'll be played. But I think no one would be mad if they delayed it or delayed playoffs. I think that's something that is the least they could do if that happens. So thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll see you guys next